So we shall get started now. Thank you everybody for attending. Welcome to this week's SED online webinar. As always, we'd like to thank our supporters from IAS, which allow us to offer all of these resources free of charge. This includes our recorded lectures, the learning tools, and even virtual field trips. So make sure you take a look at the website because there's always new info going up on that. Today's lecture is from Dr. Gemma Cassidy, who is a senior journals publishing manager at Wiley. Dr. Cassidy got her master's from the University of Birmingham and PhD from the University of Southampton. She started out in geophysics and is now working at Wiley in the food, earth, and environmental sciences. So thanks everybody for attending, and I'll give the floor to you, Gemma.
Thank you. So yes, as Simone said, I'm going to talk about academic publishing today and talk a bit about what publishers do, what Wiley specifically does, that's who I work for, a little bit about how I got into academic publishing, and a bit about the different roles that are available in publishing. So this is just a bit of a shopping list, and not a complete shopping list, I should say, of things that occurred to me when I was trying to write down what academic publishers do, just for a bit of context. I suppose the big traditional task that publishers have done is this top one, selling subscriptions to libraries. So we accumulate lots of journals, bundle them up together, or sell them separately, and that's how the libraries get online and print access to the journal. So that's a pretty big part of it. We manage the editorial office for some journals, about half of the journals we publish. So the people that help you get through the peer review process, who help coordinate the reviews coming in and out, who do the checks on your submission, a lot of that will be people at Wiley. For all of our journals, we handle the post-acceptance process. So production, which I know can be a point of pain for authors. So sympathies if you found this tricky stage, but that tends to be people working at the publishers who do that stage. We host the journals on our web platform, which is the Wiley Online Library. So they're all there, arranged by subject, indexed, different issues going up, special issues, virtual issues. We host all of that. We ensure that all the journals are indexed in the right places. There's so many indexes that I can't keep track of them at all, but Web of Science is probably the main one that you would have heard of. That's the organization that the impact factors come from, Web of Science. We do a lot of marketing for journals, particularly new journals require quite a bit of marketing input. We work with societies on strategies for their journals, so the IAS is an example of that. We manage the finances of every journal, and every journal does have its own financial quirks depending on business model, ownership, size. They're all a little bit different. In some cases, we hire editors, and in all cases, we have some interaction with editors, and many, many other things that I thought the font would get too small if I listed any more things, so I stopped, but this is just to give you an overview. So one thing I thought I would tackle up front, and I will talk more about the role of an editor later, is that there's often a little bit of confusion about the difference between the editors and the publishers and what roles are done by which people. So the editors are the people who are handling the papers. As your paper comes in, it gets given to either the EIC or an associate editor. They're getting your papers through the peer review process. They might also commission content, so go to specific people and say, would you like to write an article on this for my journal? They communicate with the authors. They're sometimes active researchers, they're sometimes full-time editors, and I'll talk more about that as well. They work towards the journal strategy, and they are ambassadors for the journal in their communities. On the other side of the coin are the publishers. So that's what I am. We don't handle papers, so I'm not helping the articles get through the process. We're employed by publishing companies like Wiley, others are available. We help to develop the journal strategy in partnership with whoever the relevant parties are, whether that's editors or societies. We may have academic backgrounds, obviously I do, and that's why I really enjoy the journals that I work on. Some people either have an academic background, but it's different to the journals that they work on, or they don't have an academic background and have come in more through a publishing route. I personally don't communicate with authors very much unless there's a tricky question that comes through that somehow ends up with me, which is fine. The editorial office and production teams do talk quite a lot to the authors. So what does Wiley do? Just a bit of background on Wiley as a company, as an example of one of the big 4, 5 academic publishers. So Wiley is quite an old company. It's over 200 years old these days. It's also a family company. So we have members of the Wiley family kicking about at various levels on the board, which is nice. The picture on the right is the head office in Hoboken in New York. We do not have that entire building. We have a couple of floors of it, and I'm yet to go there because I was so close to go and then COVID hit. But we have locations all over the world, as this map shows. So obviously our customers are global, and so our offices, a lot of these, I should say, are small-ish sales offices. So a lot of the South American ones, a lot of the US ones actually. The key kind of editorial offices, and this is often the case for a lot of the publishers, are New York. In the UK, we have Oxford and Chichester, and we have a fairly big office in Germany. And then we also have some offices in Asia, in Beijing, Tokyo, and offices in Australia. And then a lot of smaller offices scattered around the world, 76 offices in 30 countries and over 5,000 employees. We're slowly reopening our offices post-COVID, which I'm very excited about. We've been working from home for way too long at this point. So these are the markets that Wiley is focused on. Research is my corner of it. So that means the journals part of the business, really. So our focus is on growing research output, expanding into new geographies, and improving efficiency. Rising end user needs really just means making a better experience for the authors. It's a big focus for us. The main demands of people in this group are increased access. So I'll talk more about this in a minute, but open access is a big driver in publishing at the moment. Reduced friction is another silly way of saying we want to make life easier for authors, and improve business models, which again sort of comes back to open access. So Wiley, this is just a scattering of brands across the bottom of this. Like all large companies, Wiley has lots of different imprints and different brands that are part of it. So Wiley and Atapon is a technology company that actually hosts, so they built a platform, which is what Wiley Online Library sits on, but they also work on other things such as preprint servers. We have a couple of preprint servers that are run through Atapon. Wiley also has other arms, such as the education business, which is a lot of its textbooks, a lot of demand for post-secondary education, increasing demands for greater access, and digital tools. I'm sure you can imagine with COVID, digital textbooks have just gone, they were kind of creeping up, and now it's gone through the ceiling, demand for digital textbooks. And then talent development, Wiley's got quite a lot of brands and teams involved in kind of corporate learning and corporate development. We have a few, Cross Knowledge is a kind of learning platform. You can go do courses and things. Everything Disc is a kind of personality assessment, which is quite fun to do. So those are the 3 main sections of Wiley. There's others as well. So we're working with a number of different organizations, but really these are the main groups of people that Wiley as a company interact with. So the researchers is obviously the most important one, really. Everything comes from them. The authors writing the papers, doing the science, and submitting to the journals. The librarians, so the sales team in particular, work closely with them in helping them to get the right portfolio of journals for their libraries. The societies who own or co-own a lot of the journals that we work on, and the corporations who sometimes advertise in our journals or are more involved in that kind of talent development side of things. So this slide is a kind of really overly simplified way of saying that publishing is very complicated, and there's a lot of different pressures pulling in different directions on the publishing industry at the moment. Economic pressures is an obvious one. Library budgets, university budgets are stretched in multiple different directions. So libraries are constantly looking for ways to trim their spend on journals, which is understandable, and trying to get the most for their investment in the publishers. technology is changing, as is user behavior and expectations. I think the move to everything being digital is obvious, although when I started in Wiley, I think we did still have a journal where the way they did the proofs was to post them between 2 different offices, which blew my mind. I think that's stopped now. I think it is digital now. But users, authors are just not going to put up with silly proofing procedures that take weeks and weeks, or clunky systems. We've all moved past that point. So it's trying to modernize as many journals as possible and make them as swift and efficient as we can to remove that pain. And then a strong push towards open science. So open science includes open access. So you will have seen a number of journals that either started as open access themselves or have transitioned to being open access over the years, where you as an author or your funder or your institution pays an APC, and then the article is free and accessible for everyone to read, instead of people paying a subscription and then it being behind the paywall. Kind of flips the model the other way around. And that is a big driver in the industry at the moment. And one of our biggest challenges is trying to work out how big traditional subscription journals with big subscription incomes transition into that world. How do they exist in an open access environment? And every journal is different, and they all have they're all at different stages and how ready they are for that. So that can be quite interesting. But open science also includes things like open data, so making data more available, putting data availability statements in articles, and encouraging data sharing as much as we can. So there's lots of elements to open science. So this is a bit of an overview of Wiley's portfolio. This is constantly changing, and I've accepted it now, but it's actually impossible to find an answer to the question, how many journals do we publish? Because it starts to get blurry. We have things that are sort of half journals, half magazines. Do you count them? Do you not? Do you count the new ones that haven't published anything yet? We publish about 1,700 journals, I think, now, but this is the rough breakdown of proportions by subject. And in Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences, we have about 75 journals, 35 society partners, which is a lot, actually, if you consider one of them's AGU, which has a huge number of journals. So we have some with, 10, 15 journals, others with 1 or 2, but a pretty hefty proportion of our Earth, Space, and Environmental Science portfolio is society owned, which isn't the case for all subjects at Wiley. And we have 4 ranked in the top 10 of the JCR, which is the report that the impact factors are in. And we cover research across all subjects. I'm not going to read them all out, but across all areas of Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences. So what is my job? So I'm a senior journals publishing manager, as Simone said. So I manage a portfolio of actually entirely society-owned journals. That's not really by design, it's just kind of how my portfolio has landed, but I really like my portfolio, so I feel happy with how everything's worked out. So I have 3 societies: RMETS, the Royal Meteorological Society, the IAS, of course, and also the EAGE. And this is almost all the journals that I publish. I think I have 12. RMETS have a couple of others that aren't on here. I have a mixture of traditional subscription journals and open access journals. I think 5 of them are open access. One of them's very new, that Climate Resilience and Sustainability journal is a baby little journal that's published, I think, 7 articles now. So that one's, it's always fun launching a new journal and kind of helping them grow at the start. And then you all know sedimentology, I'm sure, and depositional record. So what does that actually mean? In reality, what do I actually do? So I am the connection between Wiley and the editors and the society teams. So I work closely with other teams at Wiley, such as the editorial office, production, marketing, finance, publishing operations, etc. And I help the editors and societies with queries and filter Wiley initiatives through to them. So I'm sort of in the middle of the communication flow between the different groups. I also look at the journals from a strategic perspective, help to develop growth plans, open access strategy. So is this journal ready to be open access? Is it not? when to move online only. That's something we've done quite a lot of this year. How to make peer review and production more efficient and faster. So just as an example, because I remember going to careers talks when I was doing my undergrad, and I'd always be like, but what are you actually doing? So this is what I'm actually doing this week. I'm planning a portfolio meeting with a group of editors and society executives. So deciding what we're going to talk about, putting slides together. Wiley has so many journals that there's always another journal that you can use as an example, but half the battle is finding it. So that's what I sometimes spend a bit of time doing, is trying to find a journal that's done something clever that I can then show to my journals and see if they want to do it too. Been drafting some contracts, which isn't my favorite thing, but we do have a legal team that help. I still find it slightly painful. Looking into some authorship disputes. So I have a kind of voluntary role within Wiley on our integrity and publishing group, and we are where any kind of ethical complaints or concerns come through to. I'm on the authorship team, so if people feel that they should be an author and they're not, or they want to add an author or delete an author, or they think I had one recently where someone had been put on without their consent, like that kind of thing, it all comes through to that team. I've been making some reports to share with editors and societies on the new impact factors. There's a huge amount of data that you can pull out of Web of Science. So we try to, luckily I don't have to do all the data pulling and making of graphs, but been writing some commentaries on those. Planning another careers related event, like buses to come along at once, with AGU, who is obviously the big society partner that our US team manage. I'm the line manager for 2 journal publishing assistants, so I meet with them regularly to see how they're getting on. And a lot of emails, although to be fair, with it being August, not as many emails as normal. I'm enjoying a slight lull in email traffic. So how did I end up here after doing an earth science degree? So I got a master's from Birmingham, PhD from Southampton, which was focused on the Macran subduction zone, which is often a forgotten subduction zone. So I'm happy to give it a plug now. With my supervisors. And then I got to that point at the end of my PhD where I didn't feel like academia was the right route for me, but I think that's quite a tricky moment where you think academia is not quite the right route, but then what else should I be doing? And considered quite a lot of different things. And I think while I was figuring it out, I essentially sent an email to the whole of the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton saying, I finished my PhD, does anybody have any sort of little side projects that I could help with in the meantime while I figure out what I'm doing, which is how I ended up picking forams in the paleoclimate lab and also picking earthquakes in the seismic lab at the same time, and working in Boscorf, rearranging cores, looking after animals for people. I worked in Lush for a while. We then spent a bit of time in Plymouth, so I was doing some undergrad practicals. It's kind of odd going to teach a practical after having worked in Lush in the mornings, come in slightly glittery. That was fun. And then probably the most publishing related thing that I did was some freelance editing of scientific papers, which there's lots of different companies that you can sign up with to do this. And it's something that journals can offer this to authors. If they've got a paper where the English needs a bit of work, then they send it out to a freelancer. So after all that, my husband, who's a volcanologist, was offered a research fellowship in Mainz in Germany. And I decided to tag along because clearly I wasn't doing anything particularly logical in the UK. Getting a job in Germany with shaky German skills was rather tricky. My job search eventually led me to Wiley, which was about 2 hours a ride away from where we lived. So that was a lot of time spent on the train. So then my first job in Wiley was 2015 in the Weinheim office in Germany, just south of Frankfurt. And I was an associate technical editor, which is a sort of funny way of saying a production editor, really. So I handled papers after they'd been accepted. They'd come through to me and I'd help get them through that process. So I did talk quite a lot to authors. I think there's a plane going over the house, sorry. Talked a lot to authors, helping them getting their articles through. I also worked on a Wiley website that was promoting content from those journals. Since then, we moved back to Oxford, where very conveniently Wiley also has an office. And I moved into the open research team, where I was for about 3 years, with a year's maternity leave in the middle. And since February 2020, I've been a senior journals publishing manager, which was really I think Wiley rearranged all the teams around that time and made this food, earth, and environmental sciences team. And I was fairly desperate to get into it with my earth science background and work on the journals that I have now. So it's all worked out quite well in the end. So what is good about working for an academic publisher? It's a really interesting and dynamic industry. We never quite know what's coming around the corner, which is probably quite stressful for the more senior people, but at least nothing is boring and it's always changing. It's nice. What I really like is that we're part of the research ecosystem, but I'm not doing the research myself. So I'm happy to sort of be part of the process. There's a chance to make a real positive change to the systems that dictate so much of academia. Things like introducing DE&I or EDI, depending on which way you want to put the letters, initiatives on journals, new peer review models, getting more early career researchers involved, resolving the ethical issues. Sometimes the publishers are seen as the baddie in the room, so it's nice to try and make change from the inside, I suppose. Everything is teamwork. I found academia a little isolating. I think that's not always the case, obviously depends what you're doing, but for me, I really wanted to work in a team, and publishing really provides that. And normally there's lots of opportunities for travel and networking, but obviously that's been slightly scuppered recently. What's less good? It is really complicated, and I spend quite a lot of time going in circles with various departments. I can't know the answer to every question, so I do end up sometimes stuck in loops with people, but nobody really knows the answer, perhaps. It can be this is probably the hardest, really. It can be a contentious industry. See Twitter if you want to see more of people's feelings about academic publishers. So that can be a bit hard. And as someone who's been an academic myself and who is married to an academic, I really see both sides of it, and I fully understand the frustrations from those who are a bit skeptical about academic publishers. So yeah, it can be a tricky place to be. And this sort of feeds into the next point as well. It can sometimes be difficult to balance the demands of a publisher versus the demands of the society or the editors. Sometimes the pace of change is not quite, people's comfort level with change is not necessarily the same on both sides of that coin. So that can be difficult. And less problematic, but it can be funny, is coming from academia to a big US company can be a bit of a culture shock, and sometimes it feels like I've wandered into an episode of The Office, whereas academia, I think, is just very casual. And yeah, the big corporate structure is something that was completely new to me coming into publishing. I'm getting more used to it now. So other roles and other publishers are available. Just snaffled the logos of a few of the big ones that I'm sure you've all heard of. In terms of other roles, I've got another slide after this about editors, so I'll leave editors for now, but managing editors are more the people who help with the peer review, manage the editorial office. So that's a separate role. Commissioning editors, in some publishers, they have that as a separate role too. The people who go out and commission papers or commission special issues, that can be a separate role of itself. Open research, so the team that I used to work in, they work on the kind of strategy side of things, the transitional deals that you might have heard of, like the JISC deal in the UK. And it's a huge field, really, the open research. So those can be really interesting jobs. And then this is another one that I think academics are quite well suited for, actually, is the analytics and bibliometrics side of things. We have some very smart people working in our analytics team who try to make sense of the vast amounts of data you can pull out about publishing and about all our journals. So they're pretty critical. So a note on editors, because I have quite a lot of conversations with people about working as an editor, and I think this is just not clear at all when you're coming at it from the outside. So there's two different types, really, of editorial role. There's the in-house editors, the ones that are employed by the publisher. So examples include the Nature portfolio. That's probably the most famous example of in-house editorial. The team that I used to work in Wiley, it's a whole suite of journals that have the word advanced at the start of it, advanced materials, and then lots of siblings. They're all in-house too. So they'll be trained academics, they'll have PhDs, some of them have postdocs. Now they're full-time editors employed by the publisher. The other type, which is more common, is external editors. So they're active academics working as editors as an additional part of their job, as a kind of bolt-on thing. They usually, but not always, receive an honoraria as part of that. It won't be a lot of money, but it's something. Token of appreciation is normally how I pitch it. And so where would you find editorial roles differs depending on what type of role it is. So the in-house editorial roles and, of course, publishing jobs will be advertised via the publisher's career center or jobs board. External editor roles can be all over the place. So they can be on the publisher's jobs board. They can be on the society website if the journal's owned by or affiliated with a society. They're often in both of those places. We hired recently for a society journal and we put it on both. Sometimes they're not advertised, particularly if it's an editor-in-chief role. Those are sometimes recruited from people who are already on the team, deputy editors or associate editors. But the lower level ones are more often advertised. So this is my last slide, and this is just about how to get a foot in the door in publishing and what do you do to try and build your network or gain experience in publishing. So doing some peer review is a really good one if you're interested in the editorial side of things. Journals sometimes do specific call outs for new reviewers, or you can just sign up on their submission platform. If you're not sure and you're keen to be a reviewer for a particular journal, you can just email the editorial office and I'm sure they'd be thrilled to have you. I think all journals struggle with not being able to find enough reviewers, or they always use the same senior people that don't have any time. So having new people added to the list is no bad thing. Follow your favorite journals, their editors, societies, publishers on social media. Twitter and LinkedIn are good. Joining editorial boards, this obviously differs depending on different journals, what they use their boards for. Often they're there to kind of advise on journal strategy. They're there as a pool of reviewers. They're there to help with special issues. Some journals have specific early career researcher boards, so if that's the stage you're at, it's worth looking for those. Associate editor roles are often the kind of entry level editor role. You don't necessarily need editorial experience to take one of those, but experience peer reviewing is pretty useful. On the publishing side of things, trying to follow the conversations around the big issues, such as open access, is really worth doing because it is such a big conversation and there's a lot that's been written on blogs. Wiley has a blog where they talk a lot about this. Twitter, if you find the balanced bits on Twitter, can be really useful. But also, I shouldn't end with a negative warning, but do be selective about which journals and publishers you engage with. There are still predatory journals and publishers around, and I know that all academics get tens of emails every year saying join our editorial board for a journal you've never heard of, and it's just not worth your time to engage with journals that aren't really contributing to the community. So I would advise being selective. And that was all from me. Thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions that I can't answer now, or you want to email me, you're more than welcome to. My email address is just up there.
All right. Thank you very much, Gemma. That was super informative. So just so everybody knows, the chat is now open. So if you have any questions, please post them in there and I will read them out. We already have a question. This is from Mohammed from Western Michigan University in the States. Can you please tell us more about your experience working as a freelancer editing scientific papers?
Yes, I can. I wish I could remember the name of the company. I think it was Stallard Scientific, perhaps. I signed up. I think if you just Google freelance scientific editors, there's another one called Cactus, I think, which does a lot of this. And essentially I signed up and said, my expertise is this, that, and the other, earth sciences, geophysics, tectonics, I think was what I said. And then I don't know what journals they had in their kind of client base, but every couple of weeks, as much as I could take, really, they'd send out jobs to people, and then if you wanted to take them, you would, and you'd go through and give them a pretty thorough edit for English, grammar, and coherency, I suppose, just of sentence structure. and trying to make the paper as good as possible. And then I assume that the authors would then take it back to whichever journal had told them to go and get it freelance edited. I think some people do it preemptively before they submit, but I think in most cases, someone submits to a journal and then the journal says, no, you need to have another look at this before we take it any further. And yeah, it paid enough for it to be worthwhile doing for a while.
Awesome. So if anyone else has a question, post it in the chat. I have one. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but is there anything you miss about the academic side that you're not able to do as a publisher?
I think what I did miss, and what I still do miss thanks to COVID, I really miss the kind of almost the social side of academia, I suppose, like the conferences and that network that you build and these people that you've worked with over the years that you maybe only see a couple times a year in person, but it's just so nice to get everyone together. And I missed that in my previous jobs in Wiley, and then was really looking forward to getting that back in this role, because as the science publisher, I get to go to EGU, AGU, you know, it's fine, it's part of my job to go to those places, but obviously those have been virtual recently, so not quite as much fun, but yeah, I miss that side of things.
All right. The next question is from Jacko Bax in Wales. A big issue question. How does Wiley's open access policy guarantee, oh, hold on, my screen moved. Guarantee that access is open to readers and authors without disadvantaging research projects without large budgets and authors from developing countries? Is green open access with embargo a fair solution?
Good question. Yes, okay, two-part question. So how do we, I mean, open access by definition opens access to countries everywhere. So that's less of an issue. I think the problem comes on the side of the authors, right? It's the people who have to find the funding to pay for open access, and that's where things get complicated. So when we take a journal as an example of how we go through the thought process here, if we have a journal that we think, okay, maybe this is the right time for this journal to flip, that's what we call it, flip to being an open access journal. Almost the first thing we look at is the author base geographically, like where are these authors coming from? If they're European, it's less likely to be a problem because that's where a lot of these transitional deals are being signed. So the authors don't have to pay it out of their own pocket, out of their own grant. It's being paid by a central fund. It all sort of happens magically in the background and whirs along nicely. Developing low income countries are handled under a separate waiver system called Research for Life. It covers a lot of Africa and some other countries too. The ones that we struggle with are countries like Brazil is always very difficult, Australia. The US is difficult, to be honest, because the funding for open access in the US is incredibly patchy. So some universities have signed deals with publishers, some states perhaps, but it's, you know, it's tiny bits. So if we have a large amount of authors from countries like that involved in a journal, it does stop us really, because we know that if we flip it, we'll lose those authors or it'll just cause a lot of angst in the community. So it's difficult. Is green OA with an embargo a solution? It's a kind of interim solution. Yeah, I mean, I think Wiley standard embargoes 12 months for science and 24 for humanities, perhaps. It's something, but I don't think it's the best. It's a temporary solution, I think.
Okay. Our next question is from Claire in Cumbria. What's your thoughts on Sci-Hub?
Do you know, I don't know much about Sci-Hub. They put something up on our internal feed about that the other day. I do know about ResearchGate that we've recently, which always used to be kind of like the enemy, right? That ResearchGate was, to the publishers, it felt like the enemy because they were just plonking stuff all over their dashboard. And I remember as a author, I would get these emails from ResearchGate saying, post your PDF online, like it's fine. And I was like, I don't think it is fine, you know, like reading the copyright on this, but they've moved on. And ResearchGate are now working with Wiley to help people to share their articles through that platform. So I think there's a lot of different groups trying to solve this problem.
Our next question is from Valentine in Oslo. Hi, Gemma. Thanks for coming to talk to us about your side of the coin. The other one, I guess, being academics like himself. When is Wiley Journal ready for open access?
So as I was saying to the previous question, a big part of it is the author geography. Normally the first thing that flags it to us is that some journals kind of start flipping themselves. So there'll be so many authors in the journal that are either choosing to pay open access, or it's being funded, or the research is funded by someone that mandates open access. I had one that we flipped recently. I think they'd got up to about 50% of the content in the journal being open access anyway. So we're thinking, okay, like this is already getting to the point where it should happen. The other thing is the finances of the journals. And as a really simplistic example, if you have a journal that's earning, I don't know, £500,000 in subscriptions, you need to publish an awful lot of articles at an APC that's in any way plausible to keep that journal in the same financial position as from an open access perspective. So we've got to try and make, especially as so many of these journals feed so heavily into the incomes of the societies. We have societies who are really, really pro open access, would love their whole portfolio to be open access really, but they can't do it because financially it's not the right thing to do yet. So there's a lot of different angles to it.
The next question. Thank you very much, Gemma. Really informative. How are big publishers like Wiley dealing with the real problem academics and students in the global south have with getting access to completely unaffordable publications?
I think that is what open access is trying to address, though perhaps in a not helpful way if you're not in a country where you can afford APCs. And that the other side of the Research for Life program, so half of it is the APC waivers, the other half of it is providing access to subscription journals. So I think that covers a fair chunk of countries that are affected by that. But I still think there are countries where the subscriptions have been a problem over the years, especially with the bundles. I know like Wiley and Elsevier and probably Springer too often sell their journals as one big bundle, which can make it prohibitive for small universities. They are still able to order title by title, but it's tricky, and it's honestly a problem that we talk about a lot. I know it sounds as obviously what a publisher would say, but it genuinely causes us a lot of angst. How do you address everybody in this open access environment? You've got Europe, who are desperate for all the journals to be open access and don't want anything behind a paywall ever again, which is reasonable. You've got Americans who just don't have money for it at all, unless they're in like 3 universities. You've got the South who can't pay either way, the APCs or the subscriptions. So it's really tricky trying to figure out the best way to bring everyone along with it. I wish I had a clever answer to this, but I really don't. This is what the senior people at Wiley spend a lot of time angsting about.
Yeah, it sounds like a very difficult problem. The next question is from Stephen in Wales. Thanks for the talk. You focused on journals, but out of curiosity, how is the textbook industry evolving? Obviously, a move to open access is unlikely, but was wondering if there are any major changes on the horizon.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I don't know a huge amount about the books or the textbooks side of Wiley. The main thing I do know is that the effect of COVID on that side of the business was pretty brutal, because there's still a heavy print component in textbooks and books. In journals, we're moving away from it. But I think having that suddenly not be relevant at all in COVID and having to pivot everything to digital, I think was a bit of a dramatic move. So I think that's the main, and it'll stay, like a lot of things with COVID, I think it was a dramatic move, but it'll push forward what happens for the next few years. So I think a lot of stuff will be moving digital.
Cool. Next question is, what is your view on frontiers or MDPIs who are sort of flooding the industry with journals and topic editors? How is this viewed? Predatory or another business model?
Yeah, they're interesting. And I don't view either of those two as predatory. I know there was an argument recently. I don't know who called them predatory. Somebody called MDPI predatory recently, and they came back to say we're not. I don't think MDPI are predatory, but there are a lot of journals. Frontiers is a funny one with the editors, right? So there's so many of them. And we've had a few recently where we've been hiring editors, and we're like, okay, great, they have editorial experience. But then you look at it and it's Frontiers, and they're like one of 1,000 editors, and they've handled like one paper. And I'm like, I'm not sure that really not quite the same as what we're aiming for. So I think being a Frontiers editor is probably a really nice, easy entry step into publishing. I think it's quite different being a Frontiers editor to being an associate editor on a more traditional journal. Yeah, I wouldn't call either of them predatory. And that's not, I'm not just saying that because this is being recorded, I wouldn't, but they obviously are more, the born open access publishers, they can do things in a volume and speed that it's harder for traditional publishers to do. Some of their journals are better than others.
All right. Is there any other questions in the chat? That was a very informative presentation, definitely something different than what we've been seeing the last couple of weeks, but it's definitely an interesting idea considering lots of, there's not that many academic jobs. So we have one. So now we'll just thank you again, Gemma, for presenting with us. And thank you everybody for watching. So make sure you tune in next week for a seminar at a regular time of 4 p.m. UK time, when Zuzu Wu will be talking about the discontinuity and equilibrium wave current ripple dimensions on mixed clay sand substrates. So we hope to see you all then, and thank you again.